Hey, this is Isa Nakazawa, your host for Transmission Live, a show championing San Francisco's artists and community-based organizations. And today we are thrilled to be joined with Nicole Maxali of Balay Kreative. Nicole, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Just a brief intro. Nicole is a multi-gen San Franciscan writer, producer, I want to say actress, comedian, and current program director of Balay Kreative, which is a Filipino arts accelerator right here in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. In your own words, can you kind of jump in and tell us, like, what is Balay Kreative? What's your specific role? And yeah, how did you get connected to them?
We're a neighbor of yours. So we're just down the street on Mission Street. And we are a Filipino American arts studio, a streaming hub. We're all about supporting Filipino artists. Basically.
Amazing. So what does that come with? Is that like business, marketing?
It's everything. So we have several re-granting programs. We have a residency program, and we also have a masterclass series that starts next month.
Okay.
Yeah, June 8th, plug, called the masterclass series. And we are also naming our creative growth grantees this year as well. Wow. Yeah, so a lot of exciting things coming this spring.
Amazing. What is the Creative Growth Grantee Program?
So it's one of our biggest programs, and we received money from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Development to give to Filipino American artists. So we choose 6 to 7 grantees in all different disciplines, from music to visual arts to film and media and podcasting. And we give them money, we give them space to do their art for 3 months, and then we find venues within the SOMA neighborhood, specifically SOMA Pilipinas, to actually present their final presentations.
Oh, amazing. Wow, that sounds great. I love how comprehensive that is, because I feel like all of those things are what artists need to get their practice off the ground.
Exactly.
Space, and like money,
yes.
Capital, and then all the immaterial support that I think, the pandemic really emphasized how much we need each other, how much we need cohort learning. That's a big thing here at BAVAC, just like,
yes.
How do we not work in isolation when, film is an interesting medium for me, because on the one hand, it's very collaborative.
Yes.
And on the other hand, there are isolating aspects to it. Like if you're a screenwriter or if
you're
an editor in the darkness. So yeah, I think of like the ways that our art is strengthened through community. Can you tell me how long Balay Kreative's been founded?
So Balay Kreative was founded in the dark of the pandemic.
Yes. Oh, wow, it's new.
It's actually very new, 3 years old. It started by our founders, Desi Danganan, Gina Rosales, and Kim Arteche. And basically what happened was, rest in peace, Mayor Ed Lee was giving a tour to our founders of the SFMTA spaces that weren't being used. And Desi, Gina, and Kim suggested that space, which is underneath the 5th and Mission Street garage, be used for artists, for entrepreneurs, for a retail store called Republica. So it was supposed to be a retail store, and Ed Lee, the day before he passed away, actually greenlighted it.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we were able to gain access to the space, and then we were starting construction and getting the plans ready, and then COVID hit.
Right.
And so my boss, Desi, said, well, okay, we got to put a pause on retail since lockdown was happening.
Yeah.
No one was allowed to go outside and shop. And so during that time, they sort of got all together and said, well, what can we do with this space? And as lockdown lifted, they decided, okay, let's make it a space for artists specifically. And so they created different aspects to the space. So there's a laser cutter. There's,
cool.
Yeah, we have a whole sewing area. It's a really dope space. We have a streaming hub for folks that want to do content creation and podcasting.
Wow.
And then we have just a common area for folks and artists to be in community with each other.
Oh, amazing. Congratulations. That's
Thank
so
you.
New and exciting and very needed right now.
Yes.
And I wanted to give you and Desi flowers because when I moved here in 2008, which feels very long ago, I guess it wasn't, Desi was running like so many cafes. I've seen you do your thing over the years. So I think it's really interesting and cool to see the progression of like artists and, entrepreneurs like yourself and Desi throughout the years and your commitment to San Francisco. So I just want to say, like, it's been cool seeing you, throughout the years take on different roles. I'm curious, like, at this point in your career, why Balay Kreative and why this program director role? Like, what speaks to you right now about it?
Yeah, I think when we first met, I was heavy into solo performance.
Yeah.
And performing, ironically, on Mission Street for a piano fight. They had a theater on Mission Street, and I was producing all their solo performance shows.
Totally.
I was also doing a lot of stand-up.
Yes.
And that's when I also knew you and Christine.
Totally.
And Desi actually, I think, owned Polang Lounge at the time.
And the coffee spot.
Yeah. It was close to Mission.
Yeah, and Barry Jenkins was writing.
Barry Jenkins.
And we were sitting across from each other doing like all of our creative projects.
Exactly.
And you're creating spaces where all of these people have done their passion projects.
It's just a trip to see, because I was in New York for 10 years. So to come back, to answer your question, to come back to San Francisco, a place where I was born and raised, and I have 3 generations of ancestors that call San Francisco their home. So to come back, it was more of a calling, I want to say, because it was during the pandemic. Everything was in lockdown. I really didn't know what my next steps were as a creative. I knew I couldn't go into acting here because there's not a lot of acting opportunities unless you're like an ACT or just doing theater. And so I knew I wanted to sort of be a phoenix and transition my artistry. And so I focused on writing and directing. And then as I was in the throes of editing my first short film, I got news that I was pregnant.
Wow, life.
Yeah, life.
Life be life. Yeah.
And I had to make a decision. I knew I didn't want to be on set during my pregnancy because it's a lot of energy. Yeah. And I didn't want to be away from my husband during that time because a lot of the set work was in LA. And I had all these opportunities to work on set in LA. And so I said, well, what do I want to focus on here in the Bay? And my family has a long history of activism, arts and culture, and also just being in a community, specifically the Filipino American community, and pushing the culture forward. And so I said to myself, I really want to continue that legacy, on top of building my own legacy with my son. Wow. And so the call for program manager went out for Balay Kreative at that same time. And I saw Desi at an event, a community event, and I said, hey, look, are you looking for a program manager? Because I'm actually looking for something exactly like that. Wow. And I knew it was a perfect fit. I knew it was in alignment with my intentions and what I want to do in this world. And it all manifested beautifully, and now I'm here.
Wow, yeah. That was a beautiful story.
Thank
I love
you.
the doubling parallel of legacy and like creating your own family and then continuing this. Yes. Which is so important right now. But also, like, I think it's powerful that you left. And I am curious about that because I think whenever we leave for prolonged periods of time, we always carry home with us and we generate wherever we are, but we also gain perspective on home and then also bring so much back. So I'm kind of curious, like, about that journey of New York. Like, what was that like? I mean, that's a significant amount of time. So I'm kind of curious how you found the arts and culture and activism scene there.
Yeah, it's a long story.
Yeah. Like, maybe the highlights. Half an hour. You're all,
Basically, and ironically, well, not ironically, but in alignment, Balay also means home in Waray, which is a dialect in the Philippines. So going along with the themes of home, my journey to New York was led by my father he passed away in 2011. And before he passed away, literally a month before he passed away, he told me to move to New York and follow my art.
Wow.
And just keep creating and never lose sight of that. And so that's what I did as soon as I buried him and had his funeral arrangements done. I moved to New York, and there I, went heavy into acting, heavy into writing, and really trying to pursue my dreams of making it.
I love the parentheses. I'm really resonating.
And I realized in that 10-year journey in New York and process, I did have some successes. I was a full-time actor. I did commercials. But a lot of the mainstream roles that I was getting in New York was the nurse on New Amsterdam.
Wow.
And it was still very racist.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it.
Yeah. Please.
And I realized like a lot of the dreams and expectations that I held for myself in that career were all within this world and lens of white supremacy and what's possible for white folks versus people of color. And that really was a wake-up call, especially during the pandemic. And I realized, well, if I really want to focus more on writing and directing, I can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
Let's move back to California. And that was also one of the reasons why I moved back. That and my husband got COVID. I thought he was going to die.
I love the real life logistics that are like also equally as propelling of our decisions.
Yeah, and so when he recovered from COVID, I was like, let's just go home.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do think that's a really poignant point that COVID and the pandemic kind of, it threw a wrench into a lot of things, but a lot of those disruptions are really generative in terms of where we do our work, how we can break down these kinds of like old school structures. I think for me, the one thing I will say is that when it's kind of this assumed democratization of the internet, there's still so much power that's at play that I think like sometimes it's overstated where we're at, I think, because there still are centers of power that determine distribution and marketing. But I really do think it opened up our eyes to like, we don't all have to be in New York and LA. Yeah. Like we can do our work where we are. So I think that's a really moving homecoming story. What were your observations about the differences between San Francisco and New York? I think there's oftentimes this narrative of the Bay Area as like, you can't stay here if you want success. Like, how do you find that?
So that was I would say my perception of the Bay before I left New York.
Right.
Yeah. And it was like I have this metaphor of New York being like this really like strict, rich aunt.
Amazing.
That if you do everything she asks, the way she asks, then she will give you whatever you want.
Oh my God, that's gonna stick forever. Yeah.
And San Francisco is more like the hippy dippy aunt that'll give you like a special brownie and embrace you as you are and allow you to have the room to grow and focus on your craft and figure out your voice.
Yeah, a little CBD oil.
Yeah, exactly.
A little weed brownie.
But not necessarily the aunt that will give you money.
Yeah.
Right. She'll give you love and space, but not like success.
Yes.
Quote unquote success.
Yeah.
In a capitalistic lens.
Right.
And so that was my view of both cities. And I realized now coming home, I mean, there is some truth to that. But as you're saying, like success can be anywhere. And I think right now, specifically with San Francisco going through what people call this doom loop or, the mass exodus of the tech industry and its workers, we're in this really weird transitional phase of there was a lot of money in San Francisco. A lot of money. And now it's like, where are we going? And I think we have to also think about the structures, like you said, that are basically we're having to rethink, right? All these structures that were based on like capitalism and colonization and things like that, and how as a community we can come together and rebuild.
Yes.
And that's kind of like what happens when you put all your eggs in a basket and rely on capitalism for longevity and to thrive.
Yeah.
It's like everything hit the fan.
Yes. And I do think, I think there is a lot of reality to it. Like we're both living here and this is probably one of the more like intensified states of the city as long as I've lived here, which has been a long time. And so, yeah, I am curious like what this transition period will be. And I think that there's a lot of passivity sometimes in the ways people are talking about it. And I'm like, I think it's up to the people who are committed to staying.
Exactly.
And I think there's clear responsibility and accountability with the city and different players who, again, have power to create like the security and, you know, and the care for community members that we're not seeing. So just to name that.
Yeah.
But to speak to that, you're 3 generations deep. I'm sure you've all in your family experienced so many different transformations of the city. Like, can you speak to that family legacy and any stories you might have inherited or carried with you about moments like this where San Francisco was in a state of flux and like changed?
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather came in the 1920s.
Wow.
So for Filipino Americans, that's known as the Manong generation. The first wave of Filipinos that came, and he was, you know, one of the workers in the fields, basically. And then he transitioned, and he was a drummer. And he toured all over the United States as a drummer of big bands. And then he found roots in San Francisco, and he was one of the first Filipinos to own a pool hall and restaurant on Kearny Street.
Wow.
Yeah, called Bataan Cafe, right next to the International Hotel. And so there's all these transitions that happen because after that, they faced gentrification. And Kearny Street became the financial district. So a lot of the immigrants that were living there in Manila Town, as it was called, were kicked out and booted, and now reside in Daly City, or specifically the SOMA. This is why we call it SOMA Pilipinas, because that's where they moved to and thrived. And then my grandma did a lot of work in the SOMA because she led the Philippine American Cultural Foundation, bringing traditional dances, art, and culture to San Francisco. And then she also helped rehabilitate gangs in the SOMA.
Wow.
Yeah, in the 1960s and 70s.
What gangs were active at the time?
I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't know. But
Yeah,
there was a lot of gun violence
Yeah.
up into the 80s and even 90s.
For sure.
For those that know, all the locals, you could not go to Dolores Park
Yeah.
because of the gang activity.
Right.
People would literally find dead bodies every morning in Dolores Park because of gang activity. And so my grandma just went out and was part of the community in that way. She was also one of the first Asian Americans to get grant money to help the seniors in the SOMA area.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was really a community activist. And to see that transition, and also just the transition of the 60s and 70s, my uncle Patrick Salaver was part of the Third World Liberation Front, which basically started the ethnic studies program at SF State and then went nationwide. Whoa. And that was also a huge transition in San Francisco because of the racism that was happening.
Right.
And Vietnam War and women's rights. So my family has seen all this different kinds of change.
What deep roots.
Yeah.
I'm like, Nicole, you're just naming this is some heavy hitters.
Yeah.
These are deep values.
This is why I was like, okay, if I come back, I need to come back hard.
Yeah, was that ever not to say a burden, but was there ever so much pressure to follow in this legacy, or did you embrace it from jump, or was there ever a moment of not rebellion but questioning? Or
what's funny is I was told all these stories, not all of them, but a majority of them growing up, and as a kid you don't care.
Right.
You care about boys.
Let's keep it real.
And Boys to Men and music.
Boys and yeah. And belonging.
Yeah. And fitting in, and I think also being a person of color, sort of assimilating to American culture. And so I didn't really appreciate it growing up until I went to college at SF State. And I took my first Filipino American history class, and I was the only student in that class to get all A's. And ace all the tests, and everyone was like, how are you doing this? And I was like, this is literally about my family.
Yeah.
All these questions are about my grandma or what my grandpa went through or my uncle. And that's when it kind of dawned on me what my family went through, and accomplished and pioneered here in San Francisco and California is a big deal.
Right.
It's actually like history.
That's like when you encounter that moment of recognition, but it's contextualized outside of your family, which family is so it's the place of encounter, but you need to see it in a context like history to be like, whoa, grandpa. Whoa.
And also during the pandemic, I found, I would say 100 letters written by my grandmother from the 80s and 90s. Documenting all these things that she had written to her children. Wow. And I was like, Mom, how come you never shared these with us?
Raise your hand if you were raised by secrets.
Yeah, exactly.
With some omissions.
I know. Yeah. And then it kind of like gave even more context and was even more of like fire and fuel, or fuel to the fire and the flame of like, okay, I get to pass on this for my son.
That's a beautiful flip. And then you have a son too. So then it's a different position to think about.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like that was really helpful to think about the examples of Dolores Park and Kearny Street as sites of total transformation in 180. Like these places that were, you know, like folks of color coming in, then there's like gentrification kicks people out. Then they become the epicenters of power and money and whiteness. And then now we're in another sea change. So I think it's helpful to gain some perspective. And we have been here before, not this exact moment.
Yes.
It's never the same.
Yeah.
There's no returning, but like it's cyclical. And cities are like, you know, they're not just metaphors. They're going through and reflective of all of the different changes.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it just helps at least me think about like we have changed before. Like we have transmuted this.
Yes.
And it will continue to change.
It will.
What is and this is a big question, but like what is your, even if you can speak to Balay Creative's kind of vision for what SOMA or what San Francisco, this neighborhood can be in the next, let's say 2 to 5 years? Like what would you say is like a realistic vision that you have for this neighborhood?
Well, I can share what my boss's vision, Desi. And then I can share what my hope is.
I love that.
So Desi has this beautiful vision of having a thriving ecosystem right here in SOMA, Pilipinas, on Mission, where there's restaurants and retail spaces and arts hub like Balay Kreative, to bring in not just the community, SOMA Pilipinas community together, but folks from all over the Bay Area and all over the world to come and say, oh, this is where the Filipino Americans are thriving. This is what it looks like when you give people of color a chance and resources, and when people of color also take their power back, I think. And for my hope as a mother, my hope is that my son can experience that and, you know, in 10, 20 years and be like, my mother helped with this.
That's so beautiful. How old is your son, can I ask?
1 year old.
1 year old.
Yeah.
How is motherhood like I don't know, just like impacting or changing your artistic practice, if at all?
Oh, it colors everything.
Yeah.
I would say I just had this Mother's Day post on Instagram. I think the biggest lesson as a mother is all the expectations and goals that I had before being a mother was all BS.
Wow.
And now I understand all of the doors that I open, anything that I accomplish moving forward are just seeds and doors opening for him. So that it's not about my story. My story was only here so that his story can exist.
Wow, that's so expansive. And I think shedding a lot of the ego that we inherit through just being alive at this time.
Yeah.
How can we stay connected with you and with Balay Creative?
So my personal IG is Kindred Kapwa. And,
how do you spell that?
Kindred, Kindred, Kapwa, Kapwa. And then Balay Kreative is with a K. Balay, Balay, and then creative with a K.org.
Amazing. We're so excited to have you in the studio today and following up with your work and all of the Balay Creative things that sound amazing. And I wish you all of the luck.
Thank you, Isa.
Yeah.
I had a great time today.
Yes, me too. Thank you. And stay tuned for more from Transmission Live.